Hey guys, thanks for stopping by and welcome to episode 2 of Empire Interpreting's interview series. If you haven't watched episode 1 with Kip Opperman, please check that out at our YouTube page, or you can find a link to it on any of our social media accounts. On today's episode, we were lucky enough to talk with ASL interpreter and author Blair Fell. Blair spoke with us about his background in the language industry, his career as an author, his love for New York City, and much more. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode and stick around to the very end where we'll have some information on the different ways you can reach us and also some info on how to find Blair's upcoming debut novel.
Let's get started. First of all, Blair Fell, thank you so much for doing this and being here. Really appreciate it. Wondered if you would give us a little bit of background, both about just you in general and how you got your start in the field of interpreting.
Sure. Well, I started like learning sign language back in 1980 at Gallaudet College while I was going to school there in Washington, D.C. And then I ended up transferring to Gallaudet as what they had a program back then called a special student, because I was hearing and there was 8 of us, although one was actually deaf, but not manual deaf. And the 8 of us lived, studied for 1 year or a semester. And that's, where I really learned ASL with amazing teachers there at Gallaudet. And then I didn't think about becoming an interpreter until around maybe 10 years later. I mean, I continued association with the deaf community and that, but I never thought about becoming an interpreter. But I had transferred jobs, also a writer, and someone said, oh, you should screen there's an old company in New York called NYSD. A long time it closed down. And I said, really? I mean, I'm not sure I have the skills for that, but I'll go screen. During that time, this was 1993, around that, 1993, there was not many interpreters here in New York. And so I screened, I passed the screening, shocked me, and then started interpreting. In the beginning, I only took really baby jobs where no one would be killed, because I was a new interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for many years, cleaning programs, sweep that, things, and then, develop my skills. And then, I think it was almost 11 years after starting interpreting that I went for the test and passed the certification test. And in the middle of that, I moved to Los Angeles and I was writing for TV during that time. And for 3 years, I didn't really interpret. And then I missed New York and I moved back and I didn't want to work in TV anymore. So I started interpreting again. And really kind of got more involved in college interpreting and medical interpreting, and which is they're my 2 favorite kinds of interpreting right now. And then just things progressed and I continued doing that. And I love it. I'm a writer and an interpreter and I love both. And that's kind of how I started with that, is really just taking a sign language class and then, just getting more and more involved with the deaf world and associating with the deaf and blah, 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 picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am.
You had mentioned just a few moments ago that you're an author, a very accomplished one at that. I had a lot of fun reading through a number of your pieces in preparation for this.
Oh, thank you.
And you have a new book coming out, The Sign for Home.
My first book. It's a debut novel, yeah.
So first of all, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
All of the pre-reviews, I'm not sure if that terminology is right. Everybody who's had a chance to review it ahead of time seems to be glowing. So it's something that I know I'm personally going to be excited to read. And I'm curious, for for you now, because you've gone through, I think you even did like the voice recording for it.
Yeah, I did the audiobook. Yeah.
And whatever other sort of publicity that you needed to go through. You're now 2 weeks-ish away from it being officially released. What is the experience right now like for you? Because I imagine there's not much more you can do. You've written the book. Are you nervous? Is it just relief? I'm wondering what that's like for you right now.
It's an interesting question. Yeah, I am nervous, but the process, like from the point of selling the book until now, has been like exciting,
Mhm.
and nervous as well. But it's like 2 years. It was sold in August 2020 is when it was sold, and now we're in 2022, and that's the normal length of time from like selling a book until release. um Really, I'm gonna like miss this time before. I like explained to people, it's like Christmas. You're excited, Christmas is coming, and then Christmas happens, and then it's the day after, and it's like, it's over. I'm sad now. But I am excited. It's really been, I mean, the book itself is really exciting for me because it's really one of the first times I've my two careers, writing and interpreting, I've put together. And so it's like a really emotional thing for me, because my other writings about different topics, I really tried to like separate my worlds. And then I'm like, I have a lot of things I want to talk about this profession, interpreting, and I have, all these like deaf blind friends and deaf friends, and I just hadn't seen, like, there's a love story involved in the book, but it's more of a, you know, how would you sign that? Becoming coming of age story about a young man, that, the first time he goes to a deaf school and really starts like learning ASL, and then like falls in love, uh and really it's about that relationship between him, the deaf blind young man, and his interpreter.
Mm.
And that is something I really wanted to talk about, because like most of the world doesn't know this except for interpreters, is when you have a job with a deaf person, like one day job or an ongoing job, especially those ongoing jobs, you develop a relationship that's really, um it's really, what's the word I'm looking for? um it can be a very deep emotional relationship. I mean, you have to like set up boundaries, but still
Mhm.
you're in that place between the deaf world and the hearing world, and that's, a privilege to have that space. And I just really wanted to like express that story, because I haven't seen books about that topic. And I guess I'm doing a good job, because people, one of their favorite things is they learn a lot about
Mhm.
interpreting, and they learn a lot about the deaf blind community. And that's just so wonderful for me to hear, because that was the point. It was, I want to tell a love story, a friendship story, but also I want them to understand, about the microaggressions, and just oppression of the deaf blind community, and also to understand the role of the interpreter. We're not the teacher, we're not their family. It's their right to have an interpreter, and we're there just to facilitate communication.
Considering that this has been a 2-year project for you, so you finished this book, let's say, maybe in your mind it was quote unquote finished. It could have been up to 2.5 years ago, editing, selling, all of this. Are you now percolating with ideas for the next book, or has this process sort of washed over you and you want to break from that?
No, that definitely, I'm focusing on at least 3 other books now. One is like I'm polishing now. It's my second book, and then I'm writing. Really, in the middle of the process of this book, because it was a hard book. explaining those worlds, those characters. It was really hard. It took me 8 years of writing, mostly because I didn't have the time during that time, but also because I didn't think I could, write a novel. I had been a TV writer, a playwright, a speech writer, essays, yes, but like a novel, that was like a goal I didn't think I could accomplish. And so, yeah, in the middle of COVID, at the beginning of COVID, I was like editing like, a third draft of the book. And I'm like, the world is like a disaster right now. I need help to know if this book is any good. So I asked a friend who's like a successful writer, do you know someone that will read my draft and tell me where I'm wrong? Tell me this is like, crap, and I should just drop the book. And so he said, oh, you can show it to my agent. He's really a great guy. And so I sent it to him. He read it, and like 1 week and a half later, he contacted me and said, can we talk? Is that in the middle of writing this book, I gave up because it was too hard. I'm like, the point of view of a deaf-blind guy, the point of view of an interpreter, that story, the book, which is, it's a really fast read, but it's around like 399 pages now. I wrote 800 pages, so I had enough for 2 books. And then I'm like, no one's gonna like buy 2 books about this topic. So I just like edited it all down, got it down to still a little bit long, but in the middle I gave up and said, this is too hard, I can't write this book. So I switched, and I want to write something fun but with the same information, the deaf-blind world, interpreting. And I'm like, I want it to be just like light, fun, detective story, mystery. So I wrote a draft of a book about a deaf-blind detective, not detective, but like private detective that teams with this Soda, a brother of a deaf girl, and those two team up, and they just like are researching a mystery and solving a crime. Just really, I like just wrote it really fast, and then I like put it away. And then something happened, and I understood how to solve the first book, and then just continued with that. I forgot about that second book until like 3 months ago. I was like, oh no, it was longer than that, like maybe 6 months ago. And I'm like, what should I write next? And then I'm like, oh shit, I wrote another book. Anyway, I'm still not working on that book again. But when I looked at it again, I'm like, it's not bad. I mean, it's a first draft, but it's not bad. Later, I maybe will like work on that book, but now I finished a draft of another book, different than, not the same topic, not related with deafness, not related with interpreting. So I finished that, and I'm polishing that now. And hopefully in the summertime or later this spring, my agent will send it out and see what happens. And then started, I guess it's a 4th book. Writing a 4th book as well. Because
you had made mention just a moment ago of all the work that you had to do during the pandemic, during COVID. And I'm curious if you've seen, other than the obvious need to be virtual for so much of it, any changes to the industry that you think are here to stay as a result of what we've lived through via the pandemic?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, as you said, obviously, the virtual interpreting is just going to continue because it makes sense for some situations. I've seen other things related with the interpreting business that I don't think are positive, just more related with like money issues and people thinking, oh, if you're doing virtual interpreting, we can charge just 1 hour. It's like, no, me staying at home and not going out in the field still blocks me from from work. No, 2 hour minimum, period. Thank you. And I'm very, because there's always like some agencies are not good agencies that want to take advantage.
Mm.
And I've seen that happen recently more, which really like pisses me off. But with the virtual interpreting, there's negatives and there's benefits. And one real positive about that virtual interpreting is with like computer classes. Like I noticed, and I'm not saying this is perfect, because the thing I don't like about virtual is I don't have that time before class to talk with the deaf person, see like what their, not skill, but what their, mode of ASL is, and see that so you know how you can match them. And I hate that part of virtual, is I don't have that time to be like, what's up, what's your goal, what's your language style, and that's the worst part of virtual. But like with computer classes, before, like I interpret a lot of like art classes, computer classes, and in these labs it'll be like a really long room. Like I'll be sitting at the front, the teacher will be sitting in the middle with his computer blocking his face, and then behind me will be a screen where the computer screen is on the wall behind me. So if I want to see what's happening, I have to go like this. And that, delays my interpretation more, because I have to like turn around to see, like, with computer classes, you have like, icons at the top. And so you need to, okay, what is he talking about? How can I express that? Oh, that's like a little like paintbrush, if he says a word that I can't like, I want to like look behind me on the screen. And worse is in these classes, there's a lot of like soft talker people. The hearing people, they talk very soft because they're young students. They don't understand, how to be like loud enough. And they're sitting way back there. I'm sitting right here, and I'm like, what? What'd you say? And it's not like the best situation. With the virtual interpreting, the computer screen is there. The deaf consumer is there. So I'm like, and like, I know when I can just point there and they can look there, and just more perfect. That's my opinion. I don't know what the deaf person feels about that. But I feel in those computer situations, sometimes the virtual is actually really better for the interpreter. Doesn't mean it's better for the student. I can't say that now. But for me, everyone has a mic, so can hear everyone like perfect, can see the screen. That's the best thing about virtual for me. The other things I hate. I want to meet the person live. I want to see them live. You don't have the visual problems, the blurry screen, all of that. The blur when people are signing. It's like, you finger spelled something I can't understand because there's a blur. That, and so there's positives and there's negatives.
What advice would you give for an interpreter who is just now breaking into the field, somebody who is just finishing up a program somewhere and is going to start their search for an agency or work in general? Is there anything that you would want them to know before they get out to that very first assignment?
Yeah, saying that, I mean, I think the first few things I would say, one, for looking for an agency, try to stay with agencies that like focus on interpreting, for the deaf. I mean, they can do other things, but that they have knowledge about the deaf community, because so many times hearing centered agencies don't understand the field. So that's like one advice. The other is, one, be, be patient with yourself. I mean, it's hard. Real life interpreting is hard because everyone signs differently.
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh, and it's going to take some time for you to, your receptive skills to improve and to understand that, oh, everything can be signed differently. There's not one right way to sign something. And everyone has like different, like, you know, the regional signs, but also just like the physical, of making a sign can vary because maybe they have other, deaf plus disability issues. But to be patient with yourself, and really, I'm just going to repeat myself, for yourself as an interpreter. And I didn't understand this until many years after I started, is like what I already said, is that there's not one really right way to sign something. And because I was always like, oh, am I signing that right? And then a team of mine said, there's not one right way to sign something. There's many various approaches to that. And to be patient with yourself, and try not to punish yourself a lot, and just to be patient. And it takes a long time to really improve your skills, especially the receptive skills with ASL interpreting. And so that also, this is like more for older interpreters than younger interpreters, is be supportive of the younger interpreter.
Mm.
When you're working with someone and they're looking down at you and judging you, and it's like, it makes your interpreting worse. So always to be focus on the positive also. I mean, give feedback if there's a mistake, interrupt and say, oh no, that he didn't mean that. But be supportive of each other, and try to always be positive, because doing that kind of thing with your team will make their interpretation better. But if you're judging them, it's like, it gets in your head, and then you're like, like, it's really. And some of the older interpreters that started before me, during me, when I started, some of them could be very judgmental,
Mm.
and that was not helpful. It's always a difficult situation. Not always a difficult situation, but interpreting can be just, you have to focus really hard when you're interpreting. When that article about my dog
Mhm.
dying, that morning when she was dying, I had to go on a job,
Mm.
and I couldn't concentrate. And it was really like a revelation for me, is that, oh, when I'm interpreting, I'm focusing really hard, because like two different languages, what's their goal? What's the message? And this was a really simple job, with an ongoing student, a very simple job. And I couldn't interpret. I had to ask my team, can you just switch with me? I can't focus because I'm thinking about my dog, that she's sick. And it's like, oh, it just takes a lot of focus. So when someone's like judging you or whatever, it doesn't help. So be supportive of each other, and patient, because it will take time to develop your skills in the real world. So I think I would say that.
Okay, so last question for you. You have both in some of your writing, and if anybody who follows you on social media can see that you are very much unapologetic in your love of New York City and being a New York City resident, but you also have quite a bit of travel pics. And so I'm curious, as somebody who loves being in New York, wants to be in New York, is there a threshold where the negatives of being in a city, or maybe New York specifically, where you feel like, okay, I have to get away for a week? Or is it maybe the opposite, where when you're traveling, you're like, I need to get back to the city? I'm curious how you balance being in love with where you live and the joy of traveling outside of it.
Well, one thing about like loving New York is that you can travel really fast because we have like two main airports. You know, it may one reason to love New York is because you can travel easy, you know, outside New York. Um, Basically the answer is no to that part of your question. Is like, I never am tired of New York. It's more that, oh, I'm excited about like seeing the world. Um, Now, I mean, it's varied during like, you know, really altogether maybe 30 years in New York. Um, at one point in the middle part of me living here, it was like when I was coming back from a vacation, or not a flight, from a vacation, I would feel like, oh shit, New York, really stressed. Um, Now, especially because of COVID, changed.
Mm.
Anytime I'm back to New York, I'm like happy. I'm in this like wonderful city. Also, COVID made New York more human
Mm.
because COVID didn't only affect individuals. Many like huge companies collapsed during COVID, and it made, oh, that giant bank, that store, that big, you know, company store closed down. Oh, they're the same. You know, they're run by people also. And the city was empty. And as I said before, I was out, you know, on my bicycle through the city alone. I remember I have like a video of me in Times Square. I'm riding my bike, videoing. It's me and one bus, and Times Square is empty.
Wow.
And it's like, wow, it felt more my city during that
Mhm.
time. And that feeling has really stayed with me. It's like a big jungle gym, New York. You know, that's what it feels like. It's this playful place with weird people and beautiful buildings and excitement, but it's still more quiet than before. It's still, many stores are still closed. Fewer people on the street, but I love it. It's just, it's my city. It's like, this New York is my country, you
Mm.
know, and like it's weird. I've just become more in love with New York now than before. So no, I never am disappointed coming back, but I do want to leave because it's a big world and I want to see it. But I'm just so lucky that I come back to New York.